The first red flag was her phone, face down on the table, always. Jessica never used to care about that. She'd leave it lying around, unlocked, buzzing with notifications. But lately it was glued to her hand. If it wasn't in her pocket, it was charging in the bathroom with the door shut. I didn't think much of it at first. Everyone's protective of their phones, right? But one night, as we sat on the couch watching TV, I noticed her grip tighten every time it buzzed. She'd glance at me out of the corner of her eye, then quickly swipe the screen to silence it. I played it cool. Maybe she was planning a surprise. Maybe it was work. Maybe, and this thought hit me like a punch in the gut. Maybe it wasn't. It was a few nights later when things really got weird. I walked into the kitchen to grab a beer, and there she was, leaning against the counter with her phone pressed to her ear. Her voice was low, urgent. "No, I told you, I can't talk right now." Pause. I said, "I'll call you when I can." She didn't hear me come in. I stood there, frozen, watching her eyes dart nervously toward the hallway, like she was afraid someone would walk in on her. When she finally ended the call, I cleared my throat, and she jumped. The way her head snapped toward me, it wasn't guilt. It was fear, like she'd been caught red-handed. "Who was that?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "Work." One word. No details. No names. "You seemed tense." She shrugged, brushing past me like I was barely there. "Stressful project." Something inside me cracked. The version of Jessica I thought I knew, warm, open, honest, was slipping through my fingers like smoke. And that's when it happened. 2 days later, I was at work when my phone rang. A known number. Normally, I wouldn't answer, but something told me to pick up. "Is this Mark?" a man's voice asked. "Yeah." "Who's this?" There was a pause, and I heard him exhale sharply. "Listen, I don't know how to say this, but you need to know." "Know what?" My heart was pounding now, every nerve on edge. I'm John." His voice cracked slightly. "My wife's been seeing someone. I found messages, pictures. And your wife, she's the other woman." For a second, the world stopped. I could hear the hum of the office lights, the tap of keyboards around me, but everything else faded. "What?" I finally managed to say, barely recognizing my own voice. "I thought you deserved to know," John continued, sounding exhausted, like he'd been carrying this weight for too long. "I don't know how long it's been going on, but it's not just texts. They've been meeting up." The room started spinning. My legs felt like lead. "You're sure?" I whispered, even though I already knew the answer. The late nights, the phone calls, the distant looks. It all clicked into place like a puzzle I never wanted to solve. "I'm sure." John sighed again. "I saw everything." Before I could respond, the line went dead. I sat there with the phone still pressed to my ear long after the call ended, my mind racing. Jessica. My Jessica. The woman I built my life with, lying, sneaking around, meeting someone else. It didn't feel real. But the thing about truth is, once you hear it, you can't unhear it. And no amount of denial could fix what I now knew. I didn't go home right away. Couldn't. I needed to think. So I drove. Nowhere in particular, just street after street, hands gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. I must have circled the same block 10 times before I realized I had no plan. No next step. Then my phone buzzed. It was Jessica. Her name on the screen felt like a slap. I almost didn't answer, but I had to hear her voice. "Hey babe." Her tone was casual. Too casual. "What time are you coming home?" There was no tremor in her voice. No guilt. No sign that she knew her world was about to implode. "Soon," I said, forcing my voice to stay even. "You okay?" "Yeah," she replied. I heard a car door slam in the background. "Just running errands." "Everything good?" Was everything good? No, everything was wrecked. But I swallowed the lump in my throat. "Yeah, see you in a bit." She hung up, completely unaware of what was coming. I went home. I sat on the couch, waiting. When she finally walked through the door, she was all smiles, carrying a shopping bag in one hand and her phone in the other. "Hey, you're home," she chirped, kicking off her shoes. "Dinner." I stood. "Sure. But first, can we talk?" Jessica froze for a split second, so quick most people wouldn't notice. But I saw it. That flicker of fear. Of course. She set the bag on the counter and sat down across from me, folding her hands neatly in her lap. Her posture screamed confidence, but her eyes darted toward her phone again. Always the phone. I got an interesting call today. I started, watching her reaction closely. Her brow furrowed. Oh, from a man named John. That name, John, hit her like a slap. She flinched just a little, but enough. I don't know any John, she said quickly. Too quickly. Her eyes didn't meet mine. Instead, they were locked on her phone, which buzzed softly on the counter. I didn't move, didn't blink. Just let the silence stretch until she couldn't stand it. That's weird, she added, her voice a little too high-pitched now. What did he want? Oh, I said, leaning forward. He wanted to let me know that his wife's been seeing someone. Jessica's smile faltered. She licked her lips nervously. Mark, I don't know what you're talking about. Really? I interrupted, my voice sharp now. Because he was pretty specific. Said he found messages, pictures. Said his wife has been meeting up with a married man. Her eyes finally snapped to mine, wide and panicked. Mark, that's crazy. I have no idea who. Stop. My voice cut through her excuses like a knife. Just stop. Jessica opened her mouth, then closed it again. She was calculating. I could see it in her eyes, trying to figure out what I knew, what I didn't, and how much she could still control. Okay, she said finally, her voice softer. I don't know why someone would say that, but I'd never do that to you, right? And there it was. The lie. Bold, shameless, right to my face. I leaned back, arms crossed. Your phone's been blowing up all night. Why don't you show me who's been texting you? Jessica's hand twitched toward her phone, then stopped. Her smile was gone. Her mask was slipping. I don't think I need to prove anything to you, she said, her tone colder now. No, I raised an eyebrow. Because if you have nothing to hide, it shouldn't be a problem. She stood abruptly, grabbing her phone. I don't appreciate being accused like this, Mark. You're acting crazy. I stood too, stepping in her path. Let me see the phone. Her hand clenched around it, knuckles pale. You're being paranoid. I didn't back down. Then let me see it. For a long moment we stood there, locked in a silent standoff. And then, Jessica did something I didn't expect. She smiled. Not her usual warm smile, no, this one was cruel. Calculated. You really want to see my phone? She asked, her voice low and mocking. Fine. And with that, she tossed it onto the counter. Go ahead, she said, crossing her arms. Knock yourself out. But the way she said it, calm, almost bored, sent a chill down my spine. She wasn't scared. She wasn't even worried. Jessica was confident. Confident I wouldn't find anything. Confident she was still in control. And that's when I realized, she's already covered her tracks. Her phone sat on the counter between us, daring me to pick it up. Jessica stood there, arms crossed, her expression smug, like she'd already won. I didn't reach for it right away. No, I let the tension simmer. I wanted to see if she'd flinch, if her confidence would crack. But she just stood there, cool as ice. Go on, Mark, she said with a shrug. Check whatever you want. You won't find anything. That voice, dismissive, condescending, made my blood boil. She wasn't even trying to explain herself anymore. She was taunting me. I picked up the phone. Locked, of course. What's the code? Jessica tilted her head, her lips curling into a sly grin. You don't know it? We both knew that I did. It hadn't changed in years, her favorite number, 0728. Our wedding date. How ironic. I typed it in. Wrong. I glanced at her, and she actually laughed. Wow, Mark, you really think I'd keep using the same code? My hands shook with anger as I set the phone back down. What's the new code? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she leaned against the counter, casually inspecting her nails. You really don't trust me, huh? Not after today. Jessica sighed dramatically, like I was wasting her time. Fine, here's the code. She rattled off a 6-digit number I'd never heard before. I typed it in. The phone unlocked. The first thing I did? Go straight to her messages. And sure enough, nothing. No texts from anyone suspicious. No flirty exchanges. Just a perfectly curated list of conversations with family, coworkers, and friends. Jessica leaned in, her breath warm on my neck. See? Told you. You're making a fool of yourself. I ignored her. There had to be something. I checked her call history, nothing unusual. Her social media apps squeaky clean. Even her photos were mundane, full of sunsets, coffee cups, and pictures of our dog. It was too perfect. I looked up at her, and she was smiling like a cat who just swallowed a canary. You thought you'd catch me, didn't you? She said softly. God, Mark, this is sad. I slammed the phone down on the counter, making her jump. Cut the crap, Jessica. Her eyes widened just for a second, but then the mask slipped back into place. I don't know what you want me to say, she said with a shrug. There's nothing to find. And that's when I realized. She'd cleaned everything up before I ever got the chance to look. You've been deleting things, I said, my voice low, controlled. Jessica blinked, her expression unreadable. Why would I do that? Because you're hiding something. She shook her head, laughing softly. You're paranoid. You sound insane right now. But I wasn't crazy. I knew the truth. And if she thought she could gaslight me into doubting it, she was dead wrong. I grabbed her phone again, scrolling through her apps. One by one, I checked them: Instagram, Facebook, email. Nothing suspicious. Nothing incriminating. It was spotless. Too spotless. And then I saw it. An unfamiliar app, tucked away in a folder on the last page of her home screen. A black icon with no name. What's this? I asked, holding the phone up. Jessica's face paled for the first time that night. It's nothing. Just a work app. Really? I clicked it open. It asked for a PIN. Jessica lunged for the phone, but I was faster. Give me the PIN, I said, my voice steady. She froze, her eyes darting toward the door like she was considering bolting. But there was nowhere to run. I told you it's for work, she insisted, her voice shaking now. Then why are you so nervous? Silence. I stepped closer, closing the distance between us. Jessica, the PIN. Now. She crossed her arms again, but the bravado was gone. Her shoulders slumped slightly. She knew the game was up. Finally, she muttered a string of numbers. I typed them in. The app opened and my stomach dropped. Messages. Hundreds of them. All from one contact, saved under a single letter, J. The most recent message? Sent just an hour ago. Did he suspect anything? Jessica watched me read it, her face blank, her eyes cold. And for the first time, I saw her for who she really was. Not the woman I loved. Not my wife. Just a liar. You're gonna want to scroll up, she said quietly. So I did. I scrolled. My thumb moved on autopilot, but my mind struggled to keep up. The messages blurred together at first, my brain refusing to process what I was seeing. But the deeper I went, the clearer it became. Jessica hadn't just crossed the line. She'd bulldozed right over it and kept going. The texts between her and Jay were explicit. Plans. Inside jokes. Photos. Photos. I stopped scrolling when I saw the first one. A picture of Jessica in a black dress I didn't recognize, sitting in a car I'd never seen. The neckline plunged lower than anything she'd ever worn for me. She was smiling, her lips painted red. A look she hadn't worn in years. Underneath, a message from Jay. God, you're perfect. I can't wait to see you again. Her response? Same place as last time? I looked up at Jessica. She wasn't squirming or apologizing. She wasn't crying or begging for forgiveness. She just stood there, arms folded, head tilted slightly, watching me like a cat watches a mouse. You don't seem surprised, I said, my voice dangerously calm. Jessica shrugged. Why would I be? You were bound to find out eventually. No shame, no remorse, just a casual admission like this was a game she'd already won. I turned my attention back to the messages, forcing myself to keep reading. Every word was a knife to the chest. Jay, I can't believe you're still with him. He's clueless. Jessica, it's easier this way. He doesn't ask questions. Jay, what if he finds out? Jessica, he won't. Even if he does, he won't do anything about it. That one hit me like a punch to the gut. I set the phone down, slowly, deliberately, and locked eyes with her. You really think I won't do anything? Jessica didn't flinch. Mark, let's be honest. You've always been predictable. You hate confrontation. You avoid it at all costs. That's why this was so easy. My blood boiled, but I held it in. I wanted her to keep talking. I needed to understand just how deep her betrayal went. So, I said, leaning on the counter. How long? Her lips curved into a smirk. Does it matter? It matters to me. She sighed, as if I was being difficult. Fine. 6 months. Maybe longer. 6 months. Half a year of sneaking around behind my back, lying to my face, acting like nothing was wrong. And it's just him? Jay? I asked. Jessica chuckled, shaking her head. God, Mark. You really don't get it, do you? My stomach twisted. What do you mean? Jay isn't the only one, she said, her tone almost bored. He's just the one I like the most. I stared at her, trying to process her words. You've been with others? Of course. She said it like it was the most normal thing in the world. Do you really think one guy is enough to keep me satisfied? The room tilted, and I had to grab the counter to steady myself. This wasn't real. This wasn't happening. The woman I loved, the woman I thought I knew, was standing in front of me, tearing my world apart with a calm, casual cruelty that I never saw coming. You're a monster, I whispered. Jessica's smirk widened. No, Mark, I'm just honest. You, on the other hand, have been lying to yourself for years. I clenched my fists, every muscle in my body screaming at me to do something. Yell, break something, walk out the door, and never look back. But I couldn't move. I was stuck, trapped in this nightmare she'd built around me. Then her phone buzzed again. I glanced down. Another message from Jay. Is it done? Can I call you? Jessica picked up the phone, swiped the message away, and slid it into her pocket. Well, she said, brushing past me like I was nothing more than furniture. I'm going to take a shower. You've got a lot to think about, don't you? I grabbed her arm as she passed, my grip firm but not violent. We're not done. She turned slowly, her eyes meeting mine with that same cold, detached stare. Oh, we're done, Mark. You just don't know it yet. And with that, she slipped out of my grasp and disappeared down the hallway, leaving me standing there, shattered. I stared at the empty space she left behind, my mind spinning. But one thought stood out, clear and cold. This isn't over. Not by a long shot. That I stood there for what felt like hours, staring at the empty hallway where Jessica had disappeared. Her words echoed in my mind, twisting the knife she'd planted in my back. You won't do anything about it. We're done. You just don't know it yet. I clenched my jaw. She thought she had me cornered. She thought I was weak, predictable. But the thing about predictable people, we're quiet, we're patient. And when we break completely. I wasn't going to storm out or scream at her. That's what she expected. No, I had a different plan. First, I grabbed her phone. She'd left it unlocked after our little showdown, thinking she was untouchable. But now it was in my hands, and I wasn't going to waste the opportunity. I opened the app where she'd been messaging Jay. The chat history confirmed what I already knew. This wasn't a fling. It was a full-blown affair. Plans for meetups, inside jokes, even complaints about me. Jessica. I swear, he's clueless. He never asks where I've been. Jay. You deserve better. Someone who actually satisfies you. Jessica. Can't wait to see you tonight. That last message was sent just before she walked through our front door. I scrolled further. There were photos, 2 selfies of Jessica dressed up, posing in mirrors. Photos of her and Jay taken in hotel rooms. One of them kissing, his hand on her thigh. I saved everything. Screenshots, photos, chats. I wasn't just going to confront her again. I was going to destroy her. But first, I needed more. I dug deeper into her phone. Her texts, emails, social media accounts. And that's when I found the second phone number. It wasn't saved as a contact, but there were plenty of texts. They were brief and to the point, no names, no photos. But the pattern was clear. This was someone else. Another guy. Jessica really was playing the field. The latest message from this unknown number read, "When can I see you again? Last night was amazing. Last night, while I'd been home, thinking we were just in a rough patch. Jessica had been out with someone else. Copied that, too. Then, I did something Jessica never saw coming. I logged into her iCloud account. She'd been careless enough to keep the same password for everything. Within minutes, I had access to her emails, location history, and even more incriminating messages. She'd been busy. Different men, different places, different lies. It wasn't just one affair. It wasn't even two. It was a pattern. But what really got me? There was an email, one she'd sent just 2 weeks ago. The subject line? Divorce options. Jessica was already planning her exit. She wasn't going to tell me, though. No, she was going to bleed me dry first. Take what she could and walk away without a shred of remorse. I sat back, letting it all sink in. I'd been living with a stranger, but I wasn't going to let her win. That night, Jessica acted like nothing had happened. She came out of the shower in one of those silk robes I'd bought her for our anniversary. An anniversary she clearly hadn't given a damn about. She sat on the couch next to me, scrolling through her freshly cleaned phone. She hadn't noticed that I'd been through it, that I'd taken everything I needed. "Everything okay?" she asked, her voice sweet as honey. I glanced at her. "Yeah, just tired. Rough day." "You could say that." She leaned over, brushing her hand against my arm. The audacity of it made me sick. I forced a smile. "I'm going out tomorrow." She raised an eyebrow. "Out? Where?" "Meeting up with a lawyer." Her hand froze. The look on her face, priceless. "What for?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. I shrugged. "Just exploring some options." Jessica's eyes narrowed. She was trying to figure out if I knew, if I'd seen everything. But she said nothing. Instead, she plastered on that fake smile again and leaned back, pretending she was unbothered. The game wasn't over yet, but I wasn't playing defense anymore. I was setting the trap. The next day, I followed her. She thought she was clever, slipping out of the house in a simple outfit, phone in hand, acting like she was off to run errands. But I knew better. Jessica wasn't running errands. She was meeting him. I followed her car from a distance, keeping my movements discreet. She drove to a hotel, not the high-end type, but one of those chain hotels with discreet side entrances. A place people go when they don't want to be seen. I parked across the street, watching as she stepped inside. Her phone was glued to her hand, probably texting Jay or one of the others. 10 minutes passed, then 20. Finally, Jay arrived. Tall, athletic, smug. He parked his car, glanced around, and walked in without hesitation. I watched them disappear inside together. My hands tightened around the steering wheel, but I stayed calm. This was exactly what I needed, because the next time Jessica saw me, she wouldn't be smiling that I didn't go home. I didn't drive off to cool down. No, I parked my car, grabbed my phone, and walked straight toward that hotel. Every step felt heavier than the last, but I wasn't hesitating. Not anymore. This wasn't about catching Jessica in the act. I already had more than enough proof. This was about ending the game. Inside, the lobby was quiet. The receptionist barely glanced at me as I strode past. Hotels like this didn't ask questions. Discretion was part of the package. I took the elevator up, heart pounding in my chest, my mind replaying those messages I'd read. Same place as last time? He won't do anything. He never does. Last night was amazing. I reached the 3rd floor, stepped out, and followed the hallway numbers until I found the room. 312. This was it. I stood outside the door for a moment, listening. Low voices. Laughter. Her laugh. That same laugh she used to save just for me. Now, it belonged to someone else. I knocked. Silence. I knocked again, harder this time. The voices inside went quiet. Footsteps approached the door, and I heard a man's voice. "Jay." "Who is it?" I didn't answer. The door cracked open just enough for him to peek out. His eyes met mine, and for a split second, there was no recognition. Then it hit him. The color drained from his face. "Mark?" he stammered, stepping back. "What the hell are you doing here?" I pushed the door open, walking in without a word. He stumbled backward, caught off guard. And there she was, Jessica, sitting on the edge of the bed, her legs crossed, wearing that black dress from the photo. Her eyes locked on mine, wide with shock, but only for a moment. Then, just like before, the mask slipped back into place. She smiled. Smiled. "Well, this is awkward," she said, her tone dripping with sarcasm. I didn't respond right away. I looked between the two of them. Jay, pale and stammering, and Jessica, calm as ever. "You're not even going to deny it?" I asked, my voice low and steady. Jessica shrugged. "What's the point? You already know." Jay took a step forward, his hands raised. "Look, man, I didn't know." "Don't." I cut him off, my gaze never leaving Jessica. "This isn't about you." Jessica stood slowly, adjusting the hem of her dress, completely unfazed. "What now, Mark? You came all this way. What are you planning to do?" Her words were a challenge. She thought I'd break. Thought I'd yell, cry, beg for an explanation. But I wasn't playing her game anymore. I pulled my phone from my pocket and held it up. "Smile," I said, snapping a picture. Jessica's expression faltered for the first time. "What are you doing?" I took another photo. One of her. One of Jay. Collecting evidence. Her eyes narrowed. "For what?" "For the divorce." Jay's head snapped toward her. "Divorce?" Jessica didn't respond. Her focus was entirely on me now. "You're not serious." I smiled for the first time that day. "Oh, I'm dead serious. See, you thought you were so clever covering your tracks. But I have everything. Texts, photos, even your little hotel meetups." Jessica crossed her arms, her mask cracking further. "Mark, don't be dramatic. We can work this out." I laughed, a bitter sound that echoed off the walls. "Work this out? Are you out of your mind?" Jay cleared his throat nervously. "Maybe I should go." "Yeah," I said, turning to him. "You should." He grabbed his jacket and practically ran out the door, leaving Jessica and me alone. When the door clicked shut, Jessica dropped the act. The sweet, innocent tone was gone. "So, that's it? You're just going to walk away?" "No," I said, stepping closer. "I'm going to ruin you first." Her eyes widened slightly. She wasn't expecting that. "You think you can? You don't have the guts," she spat. But her voice wasn't as steady as before. "Oh, I do." I leaned in, lowering my voice. "I've already contacted a lawyer. I've got copies of everything you've done. By the time I'm finished, you won't just lose me, you'll lose the house, the money, everything. And I'll make sure everyone knows exactly who you are." Jessica's face twisted in anger. "You think anyone will care? People cheat all the time." I tilted my head. "Maybe. But what about your job? What about your friends? What about your family? Think they'll shrug it off?" She opened her mouth, then closed it again. She was finally realizing I wasn't bluffing. For the first time, Jessica looked afraid. Good. Jessica's bravado was crumbling, piece by piece. Her arms crossed tightly over her chest, lips pressed into a thin line. She wasn't in control anymore, and she knew it. "You're not going to do anything," she said. But there was no confidence left in her voice, just desperation. "Oh, I'm going to do a lot," I said, taking a step closer. "Let's start with your boss. What do you think he'll say when I send him those pictures? Company policy doesn't look kindly on employees using business trips as excuses for their little rendezvous." Jessica's face paled. "You wouldn't." I smiled coldly. "Try me." Silence hung between us, thick with tension. Jessica opened her mouth to speak, but I wasn't finished. "And then there's your parents. Your dad loves me. He always said he was glad you married someone decent. Wonder how he'll feel when he finds out his daughter's been sneaking around with a married man." And others. Jessica's mask shattered completely. Her eyes blazed with anger, but underneath it, I saw fear. "You think you're so righteous, don't you?" she snapped. "You think you've never done anything wrong?" "This isn't about me," I said, my voice steady. "It's about you. You lied to me. You cheated. And now you're going to face the consequences." She laughed bitterly. "Consequences? You're pathetic, Mark. You didn't even notice for months. You were so busy playing the perfect husband, pretending everything was fine. You think you're better than me? You're just as pathetic as the rest of them." "Maybe," I admitted, leaning in close. "But here's the difference. I'm walking away with everything. You're going to lose it all." Jessica's hands shook as she reached for her phone. "What are you doing?" I asked. Calling my lawyer. She spat. If you want war, fine. Let's go. I stepped back, watching her with amusement. Go ahead. Call your lawyer. But I've got something better. She froze. What? I pulled out a USB drive from my pocket and dangled it in front of her. Every text, every photo, every email, everything you've been hiding. Guess where this is going? Her eyes widened in horror. Mark, please. Too late for that, I said coldly. Jessica's entire demeanor changed. The anger melted away, replaced by panic. Wait, we can talk about this. We don't have to go down this road. Now you want to talk? I laughed. Where was this energy 6 months ago? When you were sneaking out of our bed to meet other men? She took a step closer, her hands outstretched like she could fix this with a simple touch. Mark, think about it. We've been together for years. Don't throw it all away because of one mistake. One mistake, I repeated, shaking my head. Jessica, this wasn't one mistake. It was a lifestyle. You built a web of lies and didn't care who got caught in it. She dropped her hands, shoulders slumping in defeat. For the first time, she looked small. I don't know why I did it, she whispered. I don't know what's wrong with me. I stared at her, waiting for that pang of sympathy, the part of me that wanted to forgive, to fix. But it never came. That part of me was gone. You don't know? I repeated. Let me tell you what's wrong with you. You're selfish. You take what you want and leave destruction in your wake. And I was too blind to see it. Jessica's eyes filled with tears. Mark, I'm sorry. I didn't want to hurt you. Then why did you? She didn't answer. Because there was no good answer. I grabbed my jacket and headed for the door. Where are you going? She asked, her voice trembling. To start over, I said, without looking back. Without you. Jessica's sobs followed me out of the room. But I didn't stop. I didn't turn around. Because for the first time in months, I finally felt free. The hotel door slammed behind me, muffling Jessica's frantic sobs. But I wasn't done. Not yet. The USB drive felt heavy in my pocket, like a loaded weapon. I walked back to my car, hand steady, mind focused. The anger, the heartbreak. It was all still there, but now it had a purpose. Jessica had underestimated me. She thought I'd collapse under the weight of her betrayal. Thought I'd forgive or at least quietly disappear. She was dead wrong. I sat in my car, phone in hand, scrolling through my contacts. There was one person I needed to call first. Jessica's dad, Robert. He picked up after 2 rings. Mark. Hey son. What's going on? Hearing his voice, warm, kind, familiar, almost made me hesitate. Almost. Hey Robert. I need to talk to you. It's important. Everything okay? You sound off. I took a deep breath. It's about Jessica. Can you meet me? There was a pause. Of course. Are you sure you're okay? I will be. We met at a coffee shop downtown. Robert showed up first, sitting at a corner table with 2 cups of coffee. He smiled when he saw me, but that smile faded quickly when he saw my expression. Mark, he said quietly. What's going on? I slid the USB drive across the table. I need you to watch what's on this. His brow furrowed. What is it? It's Jessica, I said, my voice steady. Things she's been hiding. Things you need to know. Robert's face went pale. Hiding? From you. From everyone. He picked up the drive, turning it over in his hands. Mark, are you sure about this? I wouldn't be here if I wasn't. Later that night, I got a call. Mark. Robert's voice was strained, heavy with disbelief. I don't even know what to say. I'm sorry you had to see that, I said, and I meant it. I hadn't wanted to hurt him, but he deserved the truth. I can't believe my own daughter. His voice broke, and I heard him exhale shakily. What are you going to do? I've already started the divorce process. Good. There was no hesitation in his voice. She doesn't deserve you. Hearing that from her own father? It was bittersweet. She won't get away with this, Robert continued. I'll make sure of it. Thanks, I said quietly. The next morning, Jessica called. For the first time in days, I answered. Mark, she said, her voice hoarse, like she'd been crying all night. Please, We need to talk. We don't, I replied. It's over. Don't say that, she pleaded. We can fix this. I'll do whatever it takes. You've done enough. There was a long pause. Then, in a quieter voice, my dad called me. Good. What did you tell him? The truth. Her voice cracked. He won't talk to me. That's not my problem. Jessica sobbed into the phone, but I didn't flinch. Mark, I made a mistake. No, I said coldly. You made choices, over and over again, and now you're facing the consequences. Another long silence. Then, are you ever going to forgive me? I thought about it for a moment. No, and with that I hung up. 2 weeks later, the divorce papers were filed. Jessica didn't contest. She knew she had no leverage. The photos, the messages, they were enough to ruin her reputation, her job, and her life. I wasn't out to destroy her completely, but I wasn't going to let her walk away unscathed. She moved out of the house, leaving behind nothing but memories I was ready to forget. Looking back, I don't regret any of it. Not the confrontation, not the trap, not the call to her father. Jessica thought she was untouchable. She thought she could play games with people's lives and come out unscathed. She was wrong. If there's one thing I've learned from all this, it's that betrayal doesn't just happen in a moment. It's a series of choices, small lies that pile up until they crush everything in their path. And if you ever find yourself doubting your instincts, don't. Because sometimes the whispers you ignore are the warnings that could save you. Jessica hasn't called since. But I heard through mutual friends that Jay dumped her the second he found out she wasn't the only one. Karma's funny like that.